Hello, and welcome to the San Francisco International Arts Festival 2019 interview series. Today we will be joined by Nancy Wang from Ethnohtec, who will be interviewed by Robert Kikuchi-Yngojo.
So, who is and what is Ethno-Tec?
Well, I am a co-founding director of Ethno-Tec with Robert Kikuchi-Yngojo, and we are a nonprofit that focuses on Asian and Asian American stories. So ancient mythology and folk tales, but also inspiring stories of Asian Americans in this country.
Okay, and you have a typical kinds of stories you do. Um, how is this new piece? What is it all about? Tell us about it.
Well, this new piece is like a real challenge for me because it's not just history, but it's a mystery story. It's about my grandfather, who we all just understood he died from an accident. But after finding out some interesting information, or actually rethinking information that I learned about them, that at the time of his death began to make me think, wait a minute, was it an accident or was it murder? So I have had to, my research is so extensive. I've learned so much about, for example, the Tongs. I've learned a lot about what was happening in the 1920s, and a lot about what it was like to be Chinese in Chicago versus in the West Coast. Very different. So it's so full of stuff. The challenge is how to put enough in there so the audience gets what's important and not too much, so it just goes like overwhelming, but all of it's so important, so interesting.
And given that you usually work with mythology and folk tales and some Asian American stories, tell me in a deeper reason why you think this is something that you personally want to do. What's driving you to do this piece?
Well, for one, because it's a personal story, but I have to be careful because maybe some of my family don't want to hear that it was murder if it was a murder. Um, so but that's the main thing that's driving me. Plus, I love mysteries. And here it is right in my own backyard.
And what is one of your greatest creative challenges?
Well, like I said, knowing what to put in and what to keep out because there is so much. For example, about the Tongs.
And what are the tongs?
The Tongs are these secret societies that originally started out helping people, but they soon turned against their own, which is the Chinese, their own community, and they were in charge of like gambling and prostitution and drugs and smuggling and extortion and bribery. So there was this huge Tong war going on, and it turns out that the two main players were the Moys and the Chins, and my family are the Chins.
Okay. Now, this is set in Chinatown, Chicago, 1920s. Now, when we think of that era, give us a little bit of background what's going on, because what comes to mind is Al Capone.
Right, and Al Capone did love Chinese food, but it actually starts earlier in like 1902 when there were a lot of restaurants already in Chinatown, like 150 by 1900. And my grandfather began to make these restaurants that were really huge and very fancy and catered to the European American population, so that he had, like, in his menu, 4 pages of Western American food, only 3 pages of Chinese food, but 4 more pages of liquors and cordials and beers. I mean, it was a huge business. And so who was going to be the more powerful Tong, the Moys or the Chins? And it was all about the money.
Oh, it is all about the money. Now, I know in earlier works you did, the Red Altar, the story of the Chinese fishing village, it's a very different time. So, when people think of Chinese contributing to America, they always think of like the railroads or the seaweed farmers and fishermen. This is now fast forward, 50, 60 years later into the 1920s. And so, tell us a little bit about what's going on in Chinatown with other businesses and communities. What's going on with that?
Well, you know, actually, it's not just the 1920s. It ends, this whole mystery ends in the 1920s. But in the 1900s, there were more and more Chinese moving out of the West to the East Coast and the Midwest. So we're talking not only Chicago, but Detroit and Indianapolis and Ohio. But my focus is on Chicago, which had, of course, was known for its corruption, bribery, and the politicians, the police were all involved with crime. So this Tong stuff was really started in the 1900s in Chicago. And so the wars were going on not only across the country, but really in Chicago. So I forget your question.
It was just to get a sense of the economy of the Chinese American community.
So the economy was actually held by a few merchants. The Moys had developed a grocery store in Chinatown that was the center of the community. But my grandfather began to create these mega restaurants that probably began to challenge the Moys' control of money. So I think, I don't think my grandfather, I don't think he belonged to the Hip Sing. That's the Chin Tong. But that Tong did begin to challenge the An Liang Tong, which are the Moys. So there was a big war going on, a big conflict, big rivalry going on between the Moys and the Chins.
All right. And with, as with many immigrant groups that try to establish in America, there's always that struggle to make a living, to survive, to make it work in a new land. But also in the backdrop that's going on over this window of time, there was the Chinese Exclusion Act. So how did, and especially when you think of now with, this buzz about illegal immigrants, tell me how this national policy that started in the 1800s, how did it affect your family?
Well, luckily my family came over, at least on my grandfather's side, they came over as merchants, and that was allowed under the Chinese Exclusion Act. But because of the paper sons and daughters, there was a lot of money to be made from smuggling these people in. And they became probably a huge part of the Tongs. So I think that with that, plus everyone scrambling to make a living, because the Chinese still were not able to be employed in the mainstream. They were pretty much cordoned off to a certain place to live, and they were not being allowed to be part of the mainstream employment. So they had to create their own. They had to maintain their own businesses, and that became a huge rivalry. Who was going to control it? Who was going to control the people, and who was going to control the money?
Right. Follow the money. So as you're doing the research and discovering all these shadows and underworld and secrets, you're putting it out on a public stage. How does your family feel about that?
Well, I think my immediate family, my brothers and sister, are very interested, but there are others that might not want to hear it. There was the Chins versus the Moys, and way after my grandfather died, there was a Chin who married a Moy. So I think they might not want to hear it, but I don't know. They may be more open-minded than I think. But it's still a little, you have to be careful. You have to really be careful.
And that was one of the questions I want to know. When you, in this story, Shadows and Secrets, and you're uncovering some underbelly, some secrets that happen in families, as all families have some unknown things that get discovered. When someone discovers something in their family, what do they do with that information? How do they cope with
Well,
that?
for me, I'm lucky. I'm a performing artist and I'm a writer, so I get to put it in that. I think, like it was accepted that my grandfather died in an accident. But my grandmother accused her own brother of killing him. But what I've discovered in all my research, there was a murder trial in 1907 of a Chin Y. And in that trial, it was discovered that there were 3 other Chins that were targeted to be murdered. And one of them was my grandfather. Another one was his own father. Now, I didn't even know his father was in Chicago. We never heard of a great-grandfather. So it just leads from one thing to the other that's just overwhelming me, because this was in 1907-08, but my grandfather died in 1924. Do they hold grudges that long? What else was going on between the Chins and the Moys? Was my grandfather still kind of, getting in their way? I mean, my grandfather is the one that hired the lawyer to bring the Moys to trial on that murder. That must have been either pretty stupid or so courageous, so bent on justice that he didn't think what kind of danger that might have brought not only to him but his family.
Right. It takes a lot of dedication and commitment to uncover things that have been buried. So now here it is. It's over 100 years ago. Are you the only one of your family members that cares about this or remembers any of this?
I'm the only one that's willing to do all the research.
Mm-hmm. Have there been other family members that remember bits and pieces?
I have asked all of them. All my family who knew grandfather are dead. So the only ones left are my cousins and my maybe second cousins, if they heard something from their parents, but no one has anything that they remember ever being talked about. Only me.
So in all your research with facts and dates and information and newspaper articles, you're also an artist. So tell me how far you want to stretch with sort of the freedom as an artist to create artistic license, to make all the parts, connect all the dots.
Yeah. So I'm using facts that I'm finding in the archives, in the newspapers of the long time ago, and I'm using memories, my memory of what my mother said about what her father was like, and my memory of what my grandmother would describe about him. And then I've got to take the facts and the memories, put them together through imagination and see what I can come up with. Yeah. So it's my imagination, yes, it's my imagination that has to solve the mystery, if I can at all.
Right. And so if it ends with a big question mark, after you've laid out on the stage the facts and the memories and your artistry, under all of that, there is a basic message. What do you think the overall message, what do you want to convey in this piece to the audience?
Well, first of all, this coming performance, Shadows and Secrets, is May 26th at the Southside Theater in Fort Mason, 2 o'clock and a 4 o'clock, and it is a reading. So it is a reading with a lot of progress, but it won't be completely completed. I still have to do research.
It's a beta test.
It's a beta test, but it's going to be interesting enough to get people to think, because I'm going to have the audience help me solve this mystery. And so what I want to convey is that we all have secrets and we all have shadows in our, not only as individuals, but in our families. And And how far are we willing to go? You know, a friend of ours, said this piece was really important for one because most of the times our stories are about how we were victims and how we were really persevering to make our lives here in America work because we were so, the violence against our people was so huge, and yet we succeeded. But this piece also talks about the shadow side, like the tongs, like the violence against our own people, like by our people. So, you know, for one, I think that kind of rounds out who we are as a people, not just as one-sided. Not that I want to make it even worse for us in this country and in the kind of the environment and atmosphere it is right now about immigrants or about who we are as non-European Americans. But I think it's important that we all uncover secrets and shadows, just because there's times when we're with our family and there are awkward moments, or when we think back, there were awkward moments and we didn't understand what it was. And sometimes these shadows and secrets can be freeing.
So a story like this will be relevant whether it took place 100 years ago or is happening now, or for families in the future.
Well, the tongs still exist.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know in this mystery that we're in now. And so, as we wrap this up here, tell us with Ethnohtec, how do we find you on the web?
Well, you can find us at www. And I'm going to spell the next part, Ethnohtec.org. That's www.ethnohtec.org. And for this piece, you might want to also look up sfiaf.com, which is the San Francisco International Arts Festival that's taking place at the end of May.
Great. Well, let's hope that we all sit in those seats and find the answer to the mystery.
Yeah, please, because I need everyone's help. I need your imagination, not just my imagination. So, please come help me solve the mystery. At least for now.
Thank you to Robert and Nancy for joining us. The festival dates run from May 23rd to June 2nd. For more information or tickets, you can go to the festival website at sfiaf.org or call 415-399-9554. See you at Fort Mason Center.